Oh, okay, it's a really good question. For me, so interestingly, I did an MBA 10 years ago, which was focused on sustainability. It was called the One Planet MBA. And the very first assignment I had was actually on describing sustainability and the business value. Now, there's a classic definition from the Brundtland Report of 1987 that talks about development meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's the classic definition. And I kind of still think that holds true if we really look at it from what do we mean by needs, and we take it from a holistic sense. And so I look at it for sustainability. For me, it's a holistic sense of the needs of the planet and the needs of humanity. And furthermore, for me, it's a comprehensive view of these needs. For the planet, that's reducing impact, stewarding the ecosystem, protecting biodiversity. And for people, that's not just basic needs, such as food and shelter. That's increasingly intangible, psychological, emotional, and maybe even spiritual needs. So ultimately, sustainability is about ensuring the well-being of both the earth and humanity. And for the SAC, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, this is really translated into our vision, which is a global consumer goods industry that gives more than it takes to the people and its planet. So, great question. Before we talk about mistakes, I think it's important to recognize increasingly that there's no other option than to be transparent and communicate your sustainability impacts as a company. In reality, very soon, this is going to become almost a license to operate. And it's happening at many different levels. Firstly, you've got legislation that's coming. There's a lot happening in the regulatory space. Just 2 weeks ago, Germany passed the corporate due diligence law, requiring large companies to regularly, systematically identify and address human rights and environmental risks in their supply chain. And the EU is working on similar legislation. Secondly, the financial community want to know in terms of risk and opportunity management. Investors are increasingly making investment decisions based on ESG or social environmental performance of companies. But to come back to your point, thirdly, and really important here is something around a company's reputation and what I call the market demands. In this context, the key group of stakeholders are consumers. Recently, a WWF commissioned a report with the Economist Intelligence Unit, released only in May, which showed some incredible figures. There was a staggering 71% rise in popularity of searches for sustainable goods over the past 5 years. That was with continuing growth during the COVID pandemic. 2020 Business of Fashion McKinsey report found 66% of all respondents and 75% of millennials said they consider sustainability when making a purchase. And the McKinsey report of 2020 shows how important it is to build trust and transparencies with consumers, with 70% of conservative consumers sticking with brands they know and trust during the pandemic. COVID has made people more conscious about what's in their closet. So the bottom line is consumers are demanding better information. More lawmakers and investors are requiring companies to become accountable for their impacts. So if I can write back to your question, transparency, communication will be essential, whether there are mistakes or not. No, it's a great question. I think building on what I just said before, I think the really key here in relation to tolerating mistakes is actually the first step is around building trust. And that's around communicating performance and impacts. But to build that trust, you need to do that using science-based data in a standardized way and in a way that consumers can understand and is meaningful to them. There was actually a report from Compare Ethics which said only 20% of consumers trust brand sustainability claims. So I think to start with, before even thinking about tolerating mistakes, trust needs to be built. This is a core part of the recent SAC transparency program, which we've launched, through which a number of retailers such as H&M and Nerona are now communicating the environmental impacts of materials in the garments they're selling. This will only grow and expand for us. But again, the key word here is trust, which is why we're establishing this as an industry standard. And why we're also actually supporting ambitious regulation in response to the consultations on substantiating green claims and empowering consumers. The legislation the EU is considering, through the Policy Hub, of which we're a member, we recently submitted a transparency paper. In some of our key recommendations, we even included the fact that brands should no longer be able to advertise their clothing with vague and ambitious claims that they are sustainable or ethical, but claims really need to be supported by real data. Being transparent about where you are in your sustainability journey is important. So will consumers tolerate mistakes? We will see. I mean, for me, the important part of this journey is to provide consumers with credible, reliable information, which will help build the trust. In this framework, they will then have the opportunity to assess whether the mistake is a mistake, a systemic issue. But I think trust is the key to this. Handicap. A handicap, it is what it is. It's what the work we have to work with. That's what the supply chain is. In fact, it's fundamental to the work of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Many of the companies have a relationship with tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, but they cannot trace the supply chain beyond that and don't really have a clear understanding of the holistic performance down or across the complex supply chain. So the challenge is really huge and too big for even one company. That's a core part of the reason why the SAC was founded. We set out at the outset to standardize sustainability performance, go deeper into the value chain by leveraging technology, and then capturing credible data. And this was done through standardizing the approach with what we call the Higg Index suite of tools that the SAC has spent the last 10 years developing. What these set of tools mean is that actors can measure the sustainability impacts in the same way across different companies, which means consistency in the outputs, which that then means we can start looking at how we can address the big issues we have collectively. The other thing this has done is to reduce burdens in supply chains. Rather than have different companies asking for their own reports, assessments, audits, here is one for the industry. So come back again to your question. Is it a handicap? As I say, it's what it is. We have to work with it. And that's why we at the SAC are doing what we're doing in providing practical solutions to manage what you might call a handicap, or what is the industry as it is. I know as a journalist, you like straight answers. So no, it's not. It's not by default. It's definitely not as black and white as that. If I go back to my original definition of sustainability, you have to consider this holistic view. Now, there's so much still to do in achieving the supply chains and so many impacts to address. And there are real cases of where the apparel industry has delivered, but there are real cases where the apparel impact has delivered positive impacts. So if you take the case of Bangladesh, where there have been clear significant improvements in living standards, healthcare, and other societal benefits, doesn't take away in any sense from the real issues, the issues in building safety, which we know still need further work. But you have to take this holistic view. So if sustainability is about the holistic piece, no, it isn't necessarily just local production being sustainable. As long as you're producing, you're going to have an impact wherever that is. And the goal is to lessen the negative impacts and increase the positive ones. I'd like to take the environmental perspective. And again, one of the most important impacts is materials in that production chain. The type of material you choose is one of the biggest ways you can change the impact on the environment wherever you're producing. And according to the EPA in the US, 70 to 80% of the product's environmental impact is locked in during design and development stage, which is why the SEC has developed tools such as the Higg product module, which our latest version just launched last week, helps designers to assess the full cradle to grave impacts of products they're designing. So when they're designing, they can design in a way that wherever it's made, local or further around the world, they can support the production more sustainably. No, you're absolutely right. In 2009, Walmart and Patagonia, two probably very unlikely partners at what people would consider opposite ends of the spectrum, had this radical idea of bringing the industry together in a pre-competitive space, with the idea of developing this common language, measuring and communicating sustainability performance. At that time, big or small companies all were working in silos on proprietary programs, solutions that weren't moving the industry forward. So we formed the SAC and the Higg Index to ensure that we make progress and move this forward. Now, for me, if we take all companies, big and small, to share and collaborate and are needed to drive real positive change across the industry. By bringing the industry together to work on common challenges and common goals, we're able then, again, whatever size you are, to drive alignment on how you measure impact across the industry, working to leverage that data and insights and how to drive collective action to transform the industry. So that's actually become, I think, pretty critical, and it gives the opportunity for mutual learning. Whether you're big or whether you're small, you have different challenges, you have different solutions. And there's some great examples going on now of companies like Adidas and Allbirds working together. So I think the collaborative piece is critical in this. Yes, I think you're right that some aspects of this are more technical and more scientific. But it really sustainability really impacts all areas of a company, from design to finance, marketing. And for us, it's about integration. Sustainability experts must sit on product teams, not in silos. It's also, again, and I'm going to keep talking about, I think what we're doing with the SAC is where an organization like us plays a key role. Not only do we provide tools in the Higg Index, we actually provide a global community of industry experts who can provide advice, technical support, and the opportunity to collaborate and work together. All of the tools that we've developed have been developed collectively by the industry for the industry, for the people who need to use them. So you've had the input of these scientific and technical experts, and as part of the SAC, you have this community of experts that you don't necessarily need to have them in your organization. I love this question. I really love this question. There was a Wall Street Journal article recently that talked about the rise of CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers, in all industries, not just the apparel industry. They're familiar boardroom figures, companies, as they announce tough environmental targets. You've got, Starbucks, Visa, General Motors, Levi's, Boeing, all creating CSO positions just in the last year. But I keep coming back to my thing. As journalists, I know you'll like a straightforward answer, so I will give you that. If the fashion industry is truly sustainable, then no, it will not need chief sustainability officers. And why? And I think this is crucially important to understand in the next step of the industry's journey, is that because it will become the role of every employee in the company to operate and work in their jobs with a true sustainability lens and focus. And that's C-suite to shop floor. That's designers to marketeers, engineers, accountants, technicians, drivers, cleaners, you name them. They all need to have this lens. And I can give you some really practical experience from the SAC. Again, one of the tools we have is the Higg brand and retail module, which all SAC member brands and retailers have to use to assess the social environmental impacts and performance of all of their operations, from sourcing to transport, distribution, head offices, et cetera, et cetera. And what companies I've been talking to have been telling me is that to complete it, it's hard, it's difficult, it takes time. One of the biggest challenges they've got is that they actually need to speak to so many colleagues in so many different departments, because it is capturing the whole sustainability performance. And the feedback we've got is that many of these are finding this an incredibly useful tool, because it's sending the message across the organization. So to take that kind of thinking, so when the industry is fully sustainable, I would hope that sustainability is fully at the front of mind and in the heart of all employees. And everybody then will be thinking, as they do their work, is what I'm doing as an individual, giving back more than we take to the people and its planet.